Yeah.
Welcome to the MBTA Community Zoning Implementation Review Team meeting. It's Thursday, February 2nd at 7 a.m. This meeting is being held by Zoom. As everyone knows, the governor's extension on the COVID criteria allows us to continue to meet by Zoom. So this meeting is not open to the public and we are recording. So we have everyone present except for Dr. Cabral. And we have on the first part of the agenda, the welcome and introduction. So Stephanie, if you want to take it from there.
Well, first, thank you everybody for attending. This is a really important undertaking for the town. And I know a lot of you have really delved in and started familiarized yourself. I sent out some links to webinars that have been done in the past, the link to the select board's presentation that was made a week ago now. So that's really appreciated. I think everybody probably knows each other, but if we could just go around and introduce ourselves, that would be helpful. I'm Stephanie Danielson, the planning director. And
I'm Dottie Fulginetti, chair of the select board.
I'm Mark Lamb, Chair of Economic Development and on the Select Board.
Rory Caulfield, Chair of the Conservation Commission.
Patrick Allen, Chair of the Finance Committee.
Greg Strange, Chair of the Planning and Zoning Board.
Nikki Dostinian, Chair of the Affordable Housing Trust.
And Dr. Cabral, we're just going around introducing ourselves. Thank you for joining.
Of course, thank you. I apologize. I actually was the phone attendee, but
okay.
I was having some technical difficulties. Leisha Cabral, Superintendent of Schools.
Nancy DeLuca, School Committee Board Member.
Michael Blanchard, 2 more days of acting town administrator and then back to assistant town administrator.
Woohoo!
Justin Alexander, Fire Chief.
All right, I think that covers everybody. So again, I think everybody knows why we're here. The state has, or the governor last year signed into law legislation that added a section to the Zoning Act. And that section requires that MBTA communities develop and adopt a multifamily zoning district where multifamily unit development is allowed by right at a density of at least 15 units per acre with I call it a density bonus of for depending on the type of MBTA community you are, up to, I think it's up to 20%, but in any case, for Easton right now, it's 10% of your housing stock as of the 2020 census. So for Easton, our 2020 census housing stock total is 9,130. So Easton has to have a district that not only allows for a minimum of 15 units per acre, but also could accommodate up to 913 units. And again, I'm just going over this briefly. The production is not mandated, but compliance with the adoption of the zoning is required in order for the town to be eligible for certain funding. And that in the case of Easton, it would be the MassWorks Grant Infrastructure Program, which the town has benefited from over the last several years, and the Housing Choice Capital Grant Program. Let's see, what else was I just going to say? The district can include overlay districts, so it can be broken up, but a minimum of 25 acres must be contiguous. It cannot restrict, the zoning can't restrict families. It can't have age restrictions. It can't restrict the number of bedrooms, size of bedrooms, or size of units. It does allow the guidelines that have been issued by the DHCD does allow for site plan review, which generally is done by the Planning and Zoning Board. So that can address architectural design, it can discuss traffic and circulation impacts. And let's see. And part of the goal, and I'll talk more about what the task force is charged with, but the DHCD issued this guidance in mid-December and has an open comment period through the end of March. So the charge of this board in part is to identify, raise up, and develop what the comments are that the town wants to provide back to DHCD on this guidance. Analyze what the guidance is. Any concerns that we have, there have been issues that were raised that weren't addressed in the guidelines that DHCD has already responded to. So for example, people immediately noticed there was no affordability requirement and wanted to know if the town could have in their zoning what's generally called inclusionary zoning, where there could be an affordability requirement. They have responded to that and said, yes, that could be the case. But it can't be so restrictive that developers wouldn't come in and develop because of that. So you can set an impossibly high percentage of units that had to be affordable, which would then make it uneconomic for the developer. Another question was if you could allow businesses in your district. So it could be a mixed use district. And again, the answer is yes, you just still need to be able to accommodate the density of 15 units per acre, as well as meet the density bonus goal. As I mentioned, the deadline for submitting comments is the end of March. And so the task force was formed to start to review, understand, and have a conversation about the guidelines and raise concerns, questions that the task force might have out of the gates, but also as we start looking at potential areas that would be included in the overlay district, because that will really help drive comments. Things like how will the potential areas be able to accommodate sewer treatment, whether it's a packaged treatment plant, on-site septic disposal. We know we have a lot of wetlands. Those are going to cause constraints for where districts can be located. So we need to think about that. There are other questions that will probably come up. I know one that we had, it's in the guidelines, is if you adopt a district, is there going to be a renewal process? And there's a 10-year review. And it looks like from the guidelines, that's to make sure, one, that you haven't, once adopted your district, gone back and changed it so that it doesn't meet the guidelines anymore. Let's see.
Stephanie, I'm sorry, can I just jump in? Danielle contacted me. She's in the waiting room to swear everybody in. I know it's kind of mid your overview, but.
No, we're going to, yeah. I don't see her though. In the waiting room.
She says she's in the attendees queue.
Oh, there she is. I'm sorry. So Danielle agreed to join us. I thought she was going to be on a little bit later so that she can swear everyone in, so people don't need to come to town hall. Okay, well, she's out of the attendees, so she's somewhere in. Okay, Danielle, you need to unmute yourself. So Danielle, whenever you're ready. No, she doesn't have her video on. Oh. Danielle, are you there?
We cannot.
No,
hear
we
you.
can't hear you. We cannot hear you. Okay, she's gonna try to join by phone. So we'll keep an eye out for her. And I'll just continue. So again, the charge of the task force is also to start to identify where there might be the most suitable areas for the development of the district. And then we need to, as part of the process, submit an action plan to DHCD that outlines what the steps the town is going to take to develop the district, including public outreach, and the timeline. So we would, the task force will work on that and develop that action plan. And Danielle's back.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm at a conference and I don't know why my computer is just not doing the audio. So I can see everybody. You want to raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear and affirm that you will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon you as a member of this committee and to do so in accordance with the bylaws of the town of Easton and the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so help you God?
I do.
I do.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you
meeting.
so much, Danielle.
You're welcome. Sorry about the technical difficulty there.
No, that's okay.
Bye.
All right, so does anyone have any questions on the charge of the implementation team? I keep calling it the task force, but the official name is implementation team.
I mean, I have
I just-
questions throughout. So when do I fire away? Questions or comments or, things that I'd like to talk about.
Well, I think that rolls right into item 4, which is the legislation itself,
Okay.
probably. And again, has everyone had a chance to review the guidelines and familiarize themselves with what we're talking about? So good.
And Stephanie, I'd just like to interject on this, for full disclosure. Many of you may know this, but I do this for my day job. I work with these kinds of issues around housing in the region for Old Colony Planning Council. So I've been to all of the webinars. Yesterday, there was another one with the MMA. They change a little bit each time. So one of the clarifications, Stephanie was on that call yesterday too, is, the downside to the non-compliance of this, it started out that you wouldn't be eligible for MassWorks grants or housing choice grants. And I just want to let everybody know that for housing choice grants for fiscal 19 and fiscal 21, we received $225,000 each time. So $450,000 there. And for MassWorks, they went back to 2015. So we had 2 in that period, which was 15 million, 1.5 million and 2.5 million. But we also got MassWorks grants earlier than that. It just didn't show up on their records and their tables. So yesterday, they were a lot more clear about this is definitely a mandate and it's going to go beyond those. It's really going to be a criteria in any state funding that we look for. That'll be on the checklist, and it will prioritize who gets the funding. I think this is an opportunity for us to be proactive about how and where we want to do this. And part of the reasoning for this, if you look at it on a statewide, not just an Easton perspective, is they really want the climate people and the housing people and the economic development people are all trying to work together. We need more housing across the state. Where should it go? And they really want it to go near transit. And they want to try to incentivize, you know, we're an adjacent station, an adjacent community, because we don't have direct transit. So our requirement is a lot lower than the ones that have a commuter rail or bus service. But for those communities, they're trying to incentivize that the building is around the transit. So for us, they want it to be near smart growth type areas, or create it like village areas, like the Target area with Avalon, or with our downtown, or, you know, places that are not just random places, that are well designed and thought out. So that's what this task force will be looking at, you know, and understanding that there's a real downside, because there are a lot of communities that are just throwing up their hands and saying, forget it, we don't need any grants. Small communities that probably don't get them anyway. But Easton's really not, we would really have, it would impact us for many different ways, housing, economic development, and the lack of control of where we put the housing if we don't come into compliance. And the other thing about this is there is a timetable for when these things happen, and there's a long runway on this. It's not like we hear this and we have to, you know, do something by next month. To be in compliance, Stephanie will talk about the 3 steps that you have to do by May, but then there's another year that you have to plan, and then another year to get into full compliance. So it's going to be a long process where we have enough time to be thoughtful about the way that we want to approach this.
So if I mean, right in the same vein of everything you're saying, Dottie, that's where a lot of the questions come into my mind. You know, I don't like when anybody comes in and tells us how we have to do something. That just goes against my nature to be told what to do with, you know, and they lay down the requirements. So you know, if what they were asking for wasn't so huge, because what they're asking for is enormous. 50 acres. I think when in our select board meeting, we talked about 900 units. So it's not like it's a fraction of that. If it was a fraction of that, then it would be like, okay, the great loss of, you know, if I do the math, the Mass Works and then the housing choice, $1.7 million a year, in and about that amount over the past couple of years, 1.7 a year. And that number is sure to grow. And as you had mentioned, it sounds like more things will be taken off the table to kind of force these communities. And I completely know that those grants, that's like our lifeblood. We run exceptionally lean, and that allows us to do so much. So this $1.7 million to us, to the town of Easton, is huge. It's an enormous amount of money that we utilize, that we use to function, and people don't even see it. So I wrestle with this idea of, you know, 50 acres, 900 units. And then I wonder, you know, I ask myself, so there's going to be a lot of residents in town who aren't in support of this, regardless of who you are, just observationally, you know, opinions aside. So in my mind, I say to myself, so how do I justify it? How do I justify support of this to them? Even if they don't agree with me, I need to really justify my support. So like, I want to quantify more. So those grants, right, for example, that we got, what were they used for? I would love to be able to turn around and say to these people, well, if we forego these grants that are so important to our community, we wouldn't have had X, Y, and Z over these years. Like, what were they even used for?
So those two grants, one of them was used for the sewer infrastructure down in Five Corners. That was the 1.5, and then the 2.5 was used for the downtown revitalization. Before that, there was Mass Works grants to do the intersection at Queesit, right, Stephanie?
The flashing crosswalk.
Yeah.
So those grants,
And-
they
and as
illustrate
well
how
as-
important they are to.
But,
economic
right,
development.
right,
Yeah.
there's a lot, and also the initial streetscape improvements on Main Street. We
Yep.
also just submitted an expression of interest for funding. There's funding for planning now. So we will be hopefully applying for programs that will help fund the design for the Foundry Streets roadway improvements with crosswalks, bicycle lanes, and traffic management. We're hopefully going to get funding to do a study of the sewer capacity, the regional sewer capacity that would allow Easton to tie into the Brockton wastewater treatment facility. So we had 4 projects that we submitted expressions of interest for the One Stop for Growth funding, which is where it's an umbrella program that consolidates those various funding programs like MassWorks and the Housing Choice, some of the mass development grants.
But you bring up
So-
a good point, Mark, because at the end of this, town meeting has to vote on the zoning change.
Right.
So
Well,
that's
then
why we
I
wanted
asked
to
the
call,
question.
that's why
You
we
know-
wanted to call this task force, because at
Right.
first glance, when you hear this, you're immediately thinking, oh my gosh, we have to build 900 units somewhere else. Where do we do it? As we talk through this and learn more about it, and we're not going to do it in one day, the next meeting, we're going to look at some maps that we're going to purse through this project and look at it so that we all understand it. We understand what it really means. Changing the zoning is different than coming up with a requirement to build. It's hard to wrap our head around. It was hard for me to wrap my head around when I first heard it. But I think we'll talk through that, and we're going to learn about this, together, and then we will be able to talk about it confidently to people and help people make an informed decision using data and information, not just an emotional. Nobody likes anybody telling them what to do or change,
Right.
but we live in a country with
You know me
laws.
well.
We have laws and we have to follow them, or there's repercussions. So we just want to, I think Easton's always done a really good job of when these things have come up about getting in front of it, learning about it, taking advantage of it, and using it to our best interests. So we're not going to be making any conclusions today. We'll be
No.
doing this over a bunch of meetings. So
I just wanted to throw that
And
out there early on so that as we're parsing through this, we can think about all the justification, we can exhaust things, even, something that doesn't, because a lot of times people, they get together, really smart people get together and they figure out all the ways something can happen and should happen, and they don't consider the way something shouldn't happen. So when somebody, confronts them on it, they have no intelligent response and it becomes a back and forth. So I want to exhaust all the ways why it shouldn't happen as well, so I can justify the ways it should happen. So I just wanted to lay that all out there in the first meeting.
And I think those are good points, Mark. I think one of the things I have heard is, gee, the town's reacting very quickly to this. And to Dottie's point, the reason is so that the town has time and takes a proper amount of time to consider this, figure out how to comply, and really does a good job of it. I think what you'll find is there are probably, Dottie mentioned, there are other communities that are straight away are saying we're not going to comply with this. And I have a feeling that many of those communities, as they get closer to the deadline and realize what the impact may be, are going to go, oh, we need to jump on this. And it's going to be, they're going to be scrambling. One of the other things I'd like to mention is that there is technical assistance that will be available to communities to help through the process. A couple of things we were thinking is that, we may want to draft the zoning, but there can be assistance with helping with that process, and also with doing a build out analysis. So what does the build out actually look like as you're developing your requirements?
Stephanie, do you want to talk about the three things that have to be done by May 2nd in order to be in compliance so that we can be eligible for fiscal year 22 monies?
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. There's a form that the town needs to fill out after this meeting. I will complete that. I think it needs to be signed by either the chief executive. I think it has to be signed by the chief elected officer. So Dottie, I think you need to sign that. And then the first step was holding the briefing for the select board. So we've already done that. And we just need to indicate that on this form. And then the third step really doesn't apply to us. You have to make sure that your parcel information in a GIS layer has been provided to Mass GIS. And ours, it has to be updated through 2020. And Leon Scott, who is our GIS manager, provides that on a regular basis. So we're already up to date on that.
Yeah, there were only a couple of communities in our region that weren't, and Easton was not one of them. So I can confirm that we are up to date on that.
Yeah. And then again, just going through the guideline, the key dates. I mentioned that March 31st is the deadline for submitting comments. May 2nd is the deadline for submitting that form, and we'll get that submitted. And it doesn't commit you to anything. It's basically a statement of whether you have multifamily housing by right in your district and that you've complied with the other two steps. Your action plan, if you're proceeding with adopting a district, needs to be approved by DHCD no later than July 1st, 2023. And then the zoning has to be adopted by December 31st, 2024. Once your zoning is adopted, there is, you've adopted it and submitted it to DHCD, they have 90 days to, you have 90 days to submit a request to DHCD for a determination of compliance. So there's a process where DHCD reviews it and confirms that you're in compliance. I would think that, and this may be one of the comments, or questions, I haven't seen anyone ask it, but I thought about this, that we would certainly want to know that the zoning is going to be there, that determination is going to be issued before we go to town meeting and have it adopted. So I would suspect that there's a process we can check in with DHCD, have them review any proposed zoning before we actually go to town meeting.
And they will have a template bylaw that in the technical assistance providers will be able to use. So that should theoretically have already been vetted out with legal counsels too. So it shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah. I did want to mention, I know some of the folks on the meeting today have a hard stop at 8 o'clock. So we want to be very respectful of that. And at some point we want to talk about the upcoming meeting schedule. Rory has a question.
So one of the things that's come to mind is that we're currently an adjacent community. What happens if the train does come through? How does that impact our need?
Excellent question. That was answered yesterday. I guess it's out of DHCD's hand, but they did say that the MBTA is coming up with a process. So it sounds like, and Wayne and I have been talking about this, that the town probably should plan for the 15% increase. That's what it would do if they then determine Easton's an MBTA community. Our bonus density would jump to 15%. And it sounds like they're coming up with a process for assessing that.
Thanks.
With the same.
Greg, you have, oops.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Patrick. Greg had his hand raised.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, see, if I follow the process, they recognize me. Look at that. Hey, so I just wanted to, I know a lot of folks are interested in this. Being a longtime member of planning board, I've received up to 28 calls, I think, already. And I think it's important to note that a lot of the planning that we've worked on for the last 10 or 15 years has really been along the lines of what's being discussed today. And I know we're not talking specifics yet, but everybody's blown away by this 913 number. We have, as best I can tell, we have a minimum of 667 units already. And I think we have another couple other pieces that we could look at, or processes to look at, to show that we're much closer to this than we may think. And to that point, I guess one question I would have is, can any proposed district be in a local historic district?
Ken?
My initial response was going to be, I don't see why not. You have architectural review, but there's a certificate, there are some restrictions with the certificate of appropriateness. So we'll need to get an answer to that.
The reason that just for example, our local, the Village Business District, which comprises much of downtown Northeastern, and certainly is in the vicinity of the proposed train station, if the train ever comes. We have already 67 apartments that exist, multifamily. So in most other, very easy to come up with a district there that's 5 acres. So just there's
and still get the density of 15 units per acre.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So
right.
the 913 is across the district. So if you have a higher density in another area, you might have, as long as you have the 15 per unit, you could get to that number.
Oh, so you could in theory. Okay, I didn't know it was looked at it more omnibus. So you could actually.
Well,
I don't. Of the district that doesn't meet the 15 per acre.
Yeah.
Oh, then I think we're there. So.
Well, what they're not letting you do, and I asked this specifically, is they're not letting you take a map and circle where you already have your housing built, because it is meant to create some new housing. So if we took a map in and said we're done already, they'd probably reject that.
Well, I would say to the state, I understand your point, Dottie, but given we've been extremely proactive for a community of our type and size, and as you know, you've been very involved in it. So when you look at, if you look at Avalon, if you look at the 40R at the Queeset District, and if you look at Shovelworks, right there alone, those were all really advocated for in pretty much the same vein as this zoning. So I would hope the state wouldn't penalize us for being proactive and frankly just being ahead of the curve by 10 or 15 years.
So it's
our reward us for our proactivity.
Yeah, and Dottie, it's our understanding that, and I've heard this repeatedly, and I was a little late to that webinar yesterday, so maybe I missed that, but it's been our understanding all along that you can include in your district existing multifamily housing, existing areas.
Yes, you can, but it can't just include that. It's got to be a little bit bigger than what you already have.
Yes.
Well, yeah, because we have no district that actually meets that. So we would have to take a district and then build upon that district to meet that. To Greg's point, I think that's a considerable factor in where we look. If that is your point, Greg, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, I guess I have a little bit of an advantage having worked on this for 16 years.
Right.
But and certainly haven't been alone in that. Many of the people in this call have. But I think as we dig deeper into sort of the specs on this, we will find we already have a lot towards this amount, and I think we already have some well thought out plans that can be easily tweaked, if you will, to meet the guidelines. One advantage we have in Easton is our main access, north, south, and east, west, are both on the outskirts and our state highways. So that's allowed us to maintain a bit of a rural character, if you will, in the interior, but yet make it easier. What's everybody worried about with high density housing? They're worried about schools, which is really a misnomer, and they're worried about traffic. Traffic can easily be handled and frankly already exists. So we might as well streamline it, So anyways, so I think as we dig into this isn't as daunting as I think we all probably thought when we first saw it, because I'm with you, Mark. Nobody likes a mandate. I would hate to see our town painted with the same broad brush as every other town, because we certainly are unique. And I'm sure a lot of communities feel that way, but I would like to keep our town unique and take advantage of the many gifts that were bestowed upon us, you know, a couple hundred years ago.
And when we have the maps and we roll up our sleeves and look at those, I think that it's going to reveal itself to show exactly what you're talking about, Greg. So that'll be one of the next steps as well.
I would agree. I'd like to know if anybody else has any thoughts.
The only question I have is on the penalty side, right? So I think, excuse me, I think Mark brings up a good point, right? Obviously, we have to bring this and speak about this intelligently to the rest of the town, and then whatever the reaction and or final decision is of the town at town meeting is going to be, you know, the pathway forward. So if the penalty is just MassWorks community choice funding, that's question one. If there's any other sort of subsequent things we have to worry about mitigating on the path, but then Greg's point before also brought up the next point, which is, are there then subsequent penalties or what have you if we do become that MBTA community? If we do have a train station that's within the actual borders of the town, and we hit, you know, part A for being adjacent, we don't hit part A for being actually a train station town, is that something that then is, you know, we do all this work and configuration, and then we still get hit with a penalty after the fact?
Yeah, so from what we heard yesterday, it sounds like, I don't know. I think the short answer is yes, because again, they said they're coming up with a process where if you become an MBTA community, you know, how a process for you becoming compliant. So I think the answer is yes. I think what the time frame would be that they would give you to come into compliance is a question. So again, that's a good question for the comments. You know, when Greg mentioned some of the areas that are pretty obvious, you know, for helping to develop the district, around Avalon, and Wayne and I have been talking, the proposed train stations for Easton, if the South Coast Rail does proceed, are up by Roach Brothers, around Roach Brothers Plaza up there, and then in the downtown district. So I think it would make sense to look at that area, Roach Brothers, and how that might be one of the areas that's part of the district in anticipation of that coming. And it makes sense probably because of its location and how it has developed. And I don't know if Greg or Wayne have anything to add to that. But I think, and then you heard Dottie say that they are also talking about not just using the MassWorks grant and the Housing Choice Capital Grant as clubs. They're going to consider other funding options.
I do have a question, and forgive my naivete. Maybe it's a question for Greg or Rory, or even Wayne. But so, you know, if we have to develop these 50 acres, so we look at a map and we say, we like these areas, but all those areas that we point out, we pick that we enjoy or think it would fit well into, they're privately owned. So then what's the next step to look at a parcel of land that we like, but is not owned by us? What do you do?
Well, could I answer that? Because I mean,
sure, absolutely.
All your zoning is overlaid on top of privately owned property.
Right.
And that's why you have a public outreach process when you're developing zoning or making changes so you can get input. And again, there is not a mandate that the town seek, this is how I phrase it, seek out developers to now come in and build it. The town doesn't have to go out and attract developers and build, at least not at this point. It just needs to be able to be built by right. And people do
Just
have.
the zone needs to be created for this. That's it.
Yes.
So
That's another
if you
huge
can,
factor.
if you compare that to the Queesit commercial district, we zoned for that in 3 different ways. So part of that zoning allows for certain certain height buildings that were
Mhm.
taller than we normally have.
Okay.
Another part of the zone for something else. So it just means that a developer could come in and they could build
Right.
something that matches that zoning in that
Mhm.
area. Nobody's done it yet, but they could,
Well,
and that's
you-
what that is.
As we go through this, to me, it becomes less and less daunting, because it's, you create the zone doesn't mean people are just going to start lining up to fill it. As we know with, Queesit and downtown, there's plenty of open spots where we can't make developers develop as much as we want to. So the idea of creating the zone and thinking that developers are going to line up in that in 3 years, you're going to see an additional 913 units. Like there's so many things wrong with that statement. If the general public says, so in 3 years, we're going to have an additional 913 units, it's, in this meeting alone, after hearing Greg, hearing the zones that we could build upon, well, that 913 could actually reduce to 500. And the day it actually is built out, it could be a decade, because you just created the zone. You don't know if this developer is going to come in. So I think a lot of the fear initially is absolutely waning for me.
Okay, I'd like to just do a time check here because it's 7:44. And again, I know there are people who have to jump off right at 8 o'clock. And I think an important item on the agenda is setting up the meeting schedule to agree going forward. Thinking maybe the meeting bi-weekly, at least initially, and wanting to know if this, what time works best for everyone. And again, I think it was pretty overwhelming that the morning worked better for most task implementation team members. Do we want to continue at this time in the morning?
Can we do 8? Is that possible? Because 7 to 8 is like, I've
And
missed all my kids'
I
drop
really
offs
would-
and making lunch, breakfast. It really screws up my whole morning.
I would like everyone to weigh in, please.
Eight is fine. I'm just as dumb at 7 as I am at 8, so I'm happy to push it back an hour.
I can do 8 as long as Mark makes me breakfast.
Yeah.
Nikki, what about you?
I can't do 8 unless someone wants to come over and take my kids. I have to do drop off and all that.
Yep, I hear you, Nikki.
Is
I know.
that a little bit later is better, like 9?
9 would be perfect. I could do 9.
Yeah, I could work within the
Do 9.
workday hours. I could for a bi-weekly, I
7
can
to
usually
8.
carve it out.
It may as
Rory,
well
what
be
if-
between 4 and 5 when the kids get home and we're tearing our hair out. Like,
You want to do it then? That
no,
would
no.
make for
But
a very
between
active
7 and
meeting.
8 is the same as 4 and 5. Like those are the 2 worst hours of the day.
I think that makes sense too, also from a public participation perspective. I think a lot of people have that issue. So if it was a time that more people could watch or participate, might be good.
Rory,
Yeah.
but
9.
where do you weigh in on this?
They're all equally unacceptable, so it all works.
Well, Jen Carlino is also part of the group, and she was on vacation this week, so.
So it sounds like 9 o'clock is the time.
Yeah.
Okay, and Thursdays, is that any day particularly better? Is Thursday okay for everyone? Okay, 9 o'clock on Thursdays, and then Dottie, every other week?
Sure, and it's going to be a short time frame because
Yeah.
the questions have to be put together and sent in by March 31st. So we've just got February and a couple of weeks of March. And then we can look at this and evaluate, do we want the task force to go longer or meet like every few months or something as we go through this process?
Yeah, because I think, Dottie, you would agree that as this, we kind of figure out where the zoning areas might be located and working through the zoning, that will be passed off to the planning board to work on.
Mhm.
But I think having the task force come in periodically and weigh in And there will be a public outreach as part of that. So I think one of the things we want to focus on too is developing that action plan. And my thought was that we would draft something here in my office and we then run that by everybody. And I'll probably be checking in with some folks.
So now that everybody's heard this, and every time you hear it and then you hear it again, it kind of develops a little bit more. I want to let you know that next week, Old Colony Planning Council is hosting Secretary Keneally and Department of Housing and Economic Development at a webinar on February 10th at 2:30. And so I can email everybody the invitation to that, but Old Colony Planning Council sent it to all the town clerks apparently. So it's on the town's calendar, which I was surprised to see. So you can go on the town's calendar for next week and click the registration button for that. There will be Q&A on that. There's also a frequently asked questions. I offered to draft the minutes because I put a bunch of links down that I wanted everybody to have. And one of them is the frequently asked questions. And I would suggest taking a look at that because you'll see a lot of these questions that you have or you might think about after the meeting. They have answered a lot of those. But I think that this is a really great start to kind of digest all of this. And then when you see the presentation again, it's going to make a lot more sense when you hear parts of it. Does anybody have any other comments or questions?
Is our next meeting 2 weeks from today?
Yes. So that would be the 18th.
In our next meeting, what should I be thinking about between now and the next meeting?
We were
What you gonna
thinking
make me
of
for breakfast?
starting to work. So we'll send out an agenda. I think what we should
Okay.
focus on is the action plan and then starting to look at the districts. Greg, I was thinking maybe you and I and Wayne could get together and start looking at those.
Yeah, especially I'll be 2 weeks from today. I'll be calling in from Slopeside ski vacation, so I won't have visual aids. So yeah, we should get together. I think that makes sense.
I'd love to know how many units are in those districts that are already built out. Just not to say that entirely would happen, Greg, but to a degree of that potentially happening, I'd like to know. I'd like that being a part of this plan.
Yeah,
Sure,
it needs to be. Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And maybe also just for intro purposes to build out numbers that would change if we became an MBTA community rather than an adjacent community.
Yeah.
That's a good call.
I think Wayne's already calculated that.
Wayne's on it.
Not surprised.
Do we have any questions from the attendees that anybody has? I don't know how many there are.
We just have Dale at the moment.
Okay. Dale, if you have any questions, I don't know if you're driving or if you're if you want to put them through the Q&A. Nancy has a question.
Nancy.
Just about the meeting dates, you're saying Thursday, 9 a.m. So to me, that's February 17th, March 3rd, and March 17th for the next 3. Is that correct?
Yes, and I misspoke when I said the 18th. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, excellent.
Yeah,
that it?
Dale does have his hand raised.
Oh, does he?
Mhm.
Oh, he must have just raised it.
Oh, there he is.
Dale, I unmuted you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so my only question, and this was an email I also sent out to a few folks last night. I'm continuing to research. I think the committee, rather than just being identified as an implementation committee, should also undertake the task of whether the town should implement, considering all of the factors with respect to what the consequences would be if it doesn't and what this would look like if the town does implement. So I'm just raising that as a question rather than expressing an opinion. And my intent would be to continue to stay involved in the process and also help get the word out to folks, because regardless of which way the town goes on this, when you ultimately do come to present this at town meeting, assuming that that happens, I think the more you involve folks along the way, including all opinions, the more likely are that you're going to get an educated decision at town meeting. So I'm just raising that as a question and not an expressing an opinion as to the ultimate merits. Thank you.
And Chief, I'm sorry. Chief?
Yes, they are just on the schedule. When it lands on the second Thursday of the month, which doesn't happen until April and then May, I have a standing meeting at 9 on that second Thursday. Would it be appropriate to have Deputy Carroll in my stead, and does he need to be sworn in?
I think, as long as we're not voting on anything, Dottie, I think he can.
Yeah, I don't think I mean, it's unlikely we're going to even be meeting in April and May because everything
That's
has to
good.
be done by the end of March, right?
Yes,
public
well, the
comments are by the end of
comments,
March.
yeah,
So we can look at the schedule then to accommodate, or we can have Deputy Carroll join us either way.
That's good.
Dale, you're not on mute. We can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
We
Just
can hear
talking to
you.
my dad.
I'm sorry. Here we go.
I always worry about those unmuted comments. You never know what
Oh,
you're gonna
yeah.
hear in the background.
So at the next meeting, we'll focus on the action plan and the, starting to look at the potential districts.
Okay.
Great.
And then maybe a few minutes to talk about comments that we've started to collect.
Yes, because at some point we're going to have to talk about the quantification of what we're losing, not just in conversation, but actually quantify all the things that we would have lost in years past if we didn't have access to these grants.
Mm-hmm.
From a dollar
Yeah.
amount level to, as well as the project itself.
Yeah, we can start putting that together.
Project.
Yeah. That kind of goes to Dale's question.
Exactly, the justification of this.
Yep. And we can even, we can project out where we would be expecting to apply for future grants too. Because we're always thinking about that as we're.
Absolutely. I have some grants that I wanted to share or ask you to go after for some thoughts that I was having. So,
yeah.
You mentioned that there are communities that kind of threw their hands up in the air and said, we're all set with this. Do you know what those communities were? What towns?
I'm hearing the second and third hand. Dottie might, because she's a little closer to.
Yeah, I'm not going to disclose that at a public meeting. So
sorry for putting you on the spot.
Publicly against it, then I have, okay.
Well, these are just conversational kinds of things. I'm not sure that they've been really set out in public meetings or anything like that. But some of the smaller towns that might only have 1,000 year-round residents that are now being said they have to zone for 750. That they're struggling with that. So that's going to be a question, especially in the communities that don't have public sewer. So I'll just leave it at that. So we are right on time.
Yep.
Just in under an hour. If there are no other questions, does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Rory, and a second?
Second.
Rory and Greg. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we'll say it's unanimous. All right, everyone, great. We will get back and see you on February 17th.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.